Welcome to my YouTube channel. Hit the like button, share your thoughts, subscribe and tap the bell icon.
The sound of the children's laughter echoed through the busy street, but there was something off about it. The millionaire stopped dead in his tracks, eyes narrowing as he watched the woman sitting on the sidewalk with her two kids. His pulse quickened, and a chill ran down his spine. It couldn't be. But it was. He had never imagined he would see her again, least of all like this. In the middle of the bustling city, amidst the chaos, the world seemed to pause for a split second. The beggar's face was weathered, but he recognized her instantly. A flood of memories surged. She looked just like the woman he had known years ago, the one he thought had vanished without a trace. But why was she here, with children? And why did it feel like something much deeper was hidden behind her eyes? He stared, unable to tear his gaze away. The children, no older than 5 and 7, sat beside her, their clothes ragged, their hair unkempt. Yet, it wasn't their appearance that caught his attention. It was her eyes, hollow but intense. Eyes that seemed to plead for help, yet screamed for something else entirely. She looked right through him, as if she recognized him too, but the woman he remembered had a different life. She had been wealthy, just like him. Her disappearance had been a mystery that had haunted him for years. The last time he saw her was at a gala, bright smiles, a world of opportunity ahead. He had never expected that would be the last time he would see her. No goodbye, no explanation, just silence. Now, seeing her in the same city, years later, sitting on the sidewalk in torn clothes, with children who weren't there before, 1,000 questions flooded his mind. The woman who had disappeared was no longer a mystery. She was right there, alive. But what had happened? Why did she vanish? Why was she on the street now? And what was her connection to these children? His feet moved involuntarily, drawn to her. The crowd around him seemed oblivious, bustling past in their own worlds, but he was no longer part of that. He was standing in front of the beggar, his breath shallow. Her eyes met his, but she didn't speak. She didn't even smile. The only sign of recognition was the faintest flicker behind those tired eyes. It was as if a lifetime of secrets lived there, and for a brief moment, the weight of them threatened to crush him. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a few bills, but his hands shook. The gesture felt insignificant. She needed more than money. She needed something he couldn't offer. The children looked up at him. They were silent, their gazes as serious as their mother's. He knelt down, his throat tight, trying to think of something to say. His mind raced with the possibilities. Was she in trouble? Was she hiding from someone? And then, the unexpected happened. The beggar slowly reached for his hand, placing her own in his palm. It was warm, soft, but her grip was firm. There was a quiet intensity in that touch, almost a plea. "Do you remember me?" she whispered. The words hit him like a punch to the gut. His mouth went dry. I don't." Her hand tightened around his. "You should." The moment stretched, pulling him deeper into the abyss of confusion. His thoughts swirled. He knew he couldn't just walk away, not now. Not with the mystery staring him in the face. Before he could respond, a sudden noise interrupted the moment. The children began to cry, the younger one clinging to their mother's side. The sound of a car engine revving in the distance seemed to signal a shift in the air. The mother's face hardened in an instant, her eyes darting to the street behind him. She pulled her children close, as if preparing for something, or someone, to arrive. The millionaire stood up abruptly, his heart pounding. His instincts screamed at him to act. This woman, this mother, was in danger. He had to help her, but how? What did she need from him? What was she hiding? The beggar looked over her shoulder, her eyes wide with fear. She took a deep breath, then looked back at him. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't get involved. It's too late." And just like that, she pulled her children to their feet, ready to flee into the crowd. The millionaire watched, frozen. This was it. This was the moment he could make a choice, walk away and live with the nagging uncertainty, or follow her and uncover the truth. As the woman disappeared into the throng of people, he knew one thing for sure: his life was about to change forever. He had made his decision. The moment the beggar, no, the woman, vanished into the crowd, the millionaire knew there was no turning back. He couldn't walk away. Not after everything. The fear in her eyes, the weight of the secrets she was carrying, he had to know the truth. What had happened to her? What had she become? Why had she left everything behind? His mind raced as he stepped forward, weaving through the throngs of people, his eyes fixed on the narrow space where she had disappeared. His heart pounded in his chest as he fought to stay focused. The streets of the city were busy, the noise of honking horns and distant chatter filling the air, but to him, it was all background noise now. He was hunting for answers, not just for himself, but for her. He'd known her once. She had been a part of a world he knew well, affluent, polished, and full of promise. That was before she had vanished. Before everything had gone quiet. The last time he saw her, she had been standing at a gala, dressed in the finest gown, her smile radiant, her eyes full of hope for the future. It was as if she had everything she needed, everything she had ever dreamed of. But then, nothing. Not a single word from her. The whispers started quickly, but no one really knew where she had gone. The police were called, but no trace of her could be found. Some said she had left her life behind, others claimed she had been kidnapped. Either way, her disappearance was one of the most baffling mysteries in the city. But now, here she was, sitting on a dirty sidewalk, with children she had never been seen with before. And there were the eyes that spoke of untold stories, of struggles and sacrifices that only she knew. "Wait," he muttered under his breath, eyes scanning the street. "I'm not losing her again." He moved faster, dodging a bicycle messenger and the occasional pedestrian, his focus unwavering. He was close, but as he turned the corner, he lost sight of her for just a moment. Panic surged within him. His breath caught in his throat, and he found himself pushing past people more aggressively. There. She was up ahead, crossing the street with her children in tow, her movements quick, purposeful. She seemed to be trying to blend in, but something about the way she moved told him she was anything but ordinary. Her posture, the quick glances over her shoulder, it was all too deliberate. She knew she was being followed. The millionaire's heart skipped a beat. She was running, he knew it now. She was running from something. Someone. He increased his pace, not wanting to lose her again. As he neared, he tried to think of a way to approach her, to convince her to stop, to talk to him. But no matter what he thought, he couldn't seem to come up with a plan. She had already proven she wasn't someone who trusted easily. And the fear in her eyes told him that whatever was chasing her was far worse than any simple misunderstanding. He caught up just as she ducked into an alleyway. The narrow space between the tall buildings was dimly lit, filled with shadows that made the entire place feel suffocating. The air was thick with tension, and the sound of distant voices echoed off the walls. The woman, still clutching her children close, turned sharply, glancing over her shoulder one last time before disappearing around the corner. The millionaire stopped just outside the alley, debating whether he should follow. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. He had come this far, but what was he really trying to accomplish? Was he doing this for her, or was he trying to solve the mystery for his own sake? Before he could decide, a voice behind him broke the silence. "Don't go in there." The millionaire turned sharply, his heart leaping into his throat. A man stood behind him, tall and broad-shouldered, with a dark, unreadable expression. He was dressed in a suit, though it was clear from his worn shoes and slightly disheveled appearance that he wasn't a typical businessman. "Who are you?" the millionaire asked, his voice tight. The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stepped forward, his eyes scanning the alleyway with an almost predatory focus. "That woman you're following. She's dangerous. You need to stay away from her." The millionaire's eyebrows furrowed. "Dangerous? She's a beggar." "What do you mean?" The man let out a bitter laugh, his eyes narrowing as he looked the millionaire up and down. "You think she's a beggar? You have no idea who she is, do you?" Confusion swept over the millionaire. His mind raced, trying to understand what the man was getting at. "What are you talking about?" "She's not who you think she is," the man said, his voice low, almost a whisper. "And neither are you. If you're smart, you'll leave now and forget you ever saw her." The millionaire's chest tightened, the mystery deepening even further. "Who is she?" The man paused, his gaze shifting down the alley, then back to the millionaire. "I'm not the one who should be explaining this," he muttered. "But let's just say, she has ties to people you don't want to get involved with." Before the millionaire could respond, the man turned and began walking away. The millionaire stood there for a moment, staring after him, feeling a strange mix of confusion and disbelief. Ties to people he didn't want to get involved with. What did that even mean? Without thinking, he moved forward, stepping into the alleyway. The dim light flickered overhead, casting eerie shadows on the walls as he ventured deeper. He needed answers, and he wasn't going to let fear stop him now. The alley twisted and turned, and just as he thought he might have lost her again, he heard a faint cry. It wasn't loud, but it was there, desperate and full of fear. His heart lurched. It was the woman. He rushed forward, rounding the corner just in time to see her standing there, her back to him, facing a man. A tall, dark figure in a long coat. The way they stood, so close, the tension in the air, made it clear this was no ordinary encounter. The man spoke first, his voice cold and menacing. "I told you not to come back." The woman flinched, but she didn't speak. Instead, she reached out to shield her children, who were huddling behind her. "Please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Leave us alone. You don't understand." The man laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. "I understand perfectly. You don't get to run away from us. Not this time." The millionaire felt his stomach churn. This was it. This was the moment he had been dreading. He wasn't just witnessing a chance encounter with a beggar from his past. This woman, this mother, she was running from something much darker than he had ever imagined. And now, he was right in the middle of it. The alley was suffocating in its silence, save for the low murmur of the man's voice and the quiet sobs of the children. The tension in the air was palpable, as if every word spoken between the woman and the dark figure was a piece of a larger puzzle. The millionaire stood frozen in the shadows, his heart pounding in his chest. His mind was racing, trying to make sense of what he was witnessing. This wasn't just a random encounter. This wasn't just a beggar on the street. There was something much deeper at play, something that had pulled him into a story he wasn't ready for. The woman's back was still to him, but her body language screamed fear. She was trying to protect her children, but how much could she protect them from this man? From the menacing figure standing in front of her, blocking her escape. The dark figure spoke again, his voice even colder than before. "You think you can just disappear? You think you can hide from us forever?" The woman's shoulders trembled, but she stood her ground. The millionaire could see the struggle in her, she was caught between fear and desperation, knowing she was out of options. But the millionaire couldn't just stand by anymore. He had to do something. This wasn't a coincidence anymore. This wasn't just about solving a mystery. There were lives at stake here. The man noticed the shift in her posture, his eyes narrowing. "Who's there?" The millionaire's breath caught in his throat. He had been spotted. There was no turning back now. He stepped into the dim light, the crunch of gravel beneath his feet betraying his position. The man's eyes snapped toward him, and for a moment, everything stood still. Time seemed to freeze. The millionaire felt a cold chill wash over him as the man assessed him with an unreadable gaze. Well, the man sneered. Looks like we have a curious bystander. You've been following her, haven't you? The millionaire swallowed hard. I don't know what's going on here, but I won't stand by and watch you hurt her. The man's lips curled into a cruel smile. You really don't understand, do you? You're way out of your depth. The woman turned slowly, her face pale, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and guilt. Please, just leave. He doesn't know anything. This isn't his fight. But the millionaire couldn't walk away. He couldn't. The truth was too close now, and he needed to know why she was running, why her life had been turned upside down. He needed to understand who these people were and why she was so afraid of them. I'm not leaving, he said firmly, his voice steady despite the rising fear in his chest. The man took a step closer, his hand resting on the hilt of a knife tucked into his coat. The tension in the alley escalated, the air thick with the promise of violence. The woman's children were clinging to her, their eyes wide with confusion, but they were silent. They knew enough to stay quiet. They were used to this. You've made a mistake, the man growled. You think you can save her, but you can't. No one can save her now. The millionaire's mind raced. Who were these people? What did they want from her? And why was she so terrified? I don't care who you are, the millionaire said, his voice rising. I'm not leaving without answers. Who are you, and what do you want with her? The man's smile faded, replaced by a cold, menacing glare. You should have stayed out of this. But now that you're involved, you'll regret it. The woman took a step forward, her eyes locked on the man. Please, just let us go. I won't tell anyone. I'll disappear again, just like I did before. You don't get to make demands, the man interrupted, his voice laced with anger. You don't get to walk away from us. The millionaire's blood ran cold. He didn't know who these people were, but one thing was clear, they weren't going to let her go easily. Whatever this was, it was much bigger than he had anticipated. But he wasn't about to back down now. Not after everything he had seen. The woman's voice trembled. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't want this. I didn't want any of this. The man's eyes flicked to the children, then back to her. You should have thought about that before you betrayed us. Betrayed us? The word echoed in the millionaire's mind, sending a shock through his entire body. Betrayed? What was she talking about? Had she been involved with these people before? Had she done something that they were now holding over her head? Before he could say anything, the man lunged forward, grabbing the woman's arm and yanking her toward him. The children screamed, but the man didn't seem to care. He was focused entirely on the woman, his grip tightening like a vice. Leave her alone, the millionaire shouted, taking a step forward. His hands clenched into fists. He wasn't sure what he could do, but he couldn't just stand there and watch. The man sneered. Stay out of this, rich boy. You don't belong here. In that moment, the millionaire realized something. The man wasn't just a thug, he was part of something much bigger. This wasn't a simple case of a woman who had fallen on hard times. No, this was something deeper, darker. This was a world that the millionaire had never seen, a world of danger and deceit that was hiding just beneath the surface of the life he had known. As the man continued to drag the woman and her children toward the back of the alley, the millionaire's mind raced. He had to do something. He couldn't let this happen. But what could he do against a man like this? What could he do when he was so out of his depth? His eyes darted around, searching for something, anything, that could help. And then he saw it. A heavy metal pipe lay discarded on the ground, half hidden in the shadows. It wasn't much, but it was something. He grabbed it quickly, his heart pounding in his chest as he prepared to confront the man. "Let her go," the millionaire shouted, his voice filled with determination. The man paused for a moment, turning slowly to face him. The grin on his face was gone, replaced by something much more sinister. "You really want to die for this woman?" The millionaire didn't back down. He raised the pipe, ready to strike if he had to. "I'm not leaving without her." For a moment, the alley was still. The tension was unbearable, and the millionaire could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him. This was it. There was no turning back now. Finally, the man let out a low, throaty laugh. "You think you're the hero? Fine. But don't say I didn't warn you." With that, the man released the woman's arm, his eyes never leaving the millionaire. "You'll regret this," he muttered before turning and walking away into the darkness. The woman collapsed to her knees, clutching her children to her chest. The millionaire lowered the pipe, his breath coming in shallow gasps as he processed what had just happened. What just happened?" he whispered, his mind spinning. "Who are you? What's going on?" The woman looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of relief and guilt. "You shouldn't have gotten involved," she said softly. "But thank you. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come." The millionaire took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. "I need to know who they are. Who you are. What's going on?" For a long moment, the woman said nothing. She just sat there, her face filled with pain and regret. And then, slowly, she spoke. I'm not who you think I am." The air in the alley was thick with a sense of foreboding, the silence between them growing heavier with each passing second. The woman sat on the ground, clutching her children to her chest, her body trembling with the weight of whatever she had just endured. The millionaire stood a few feet away, the metal pipe still gripped tightly in his hand, his mind spinning with questions. He had intervened, but now he was faced with the truth that he wasn't prepared for, the truth that the woman was hiding something much darker than he had imagined. Her whispered words echoed in his mind, each syllable a heavy weight that pulled him deeper into a mystery that seemed impossible to escape. "I'm not who you think I am." The words hung in the air, impossible to ignore, like a door to a hidden world slowly creaking open. The millionaire stared at her, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to know more. He had to understand what she meant by that. But he didn't want to pressure her. He had already seen the fear in her eyes, the fear that had driven her to run, to hide. Whatever it was something far worse than he could have imagined. The woman looked up at him then, her face streaked with dirt and exhaustion. Her eyes, once filled with hope, now seemed hollow, distant. She was no longer the woman he remembered from the gala, the one who had laughed and danced in her beautiful gown. She was someone else entirely. I don't know where to start," she whispered, her voice shaky. "But I can't hide anymore." The millionaire slowly lowered the pipe, his mind racing. "Start at the beginning," he said softly, trying to steady his own breath. He couldn't leave her hanging now. He couldn't walk away from this. The woman hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as though expecting someone to appear at any moment. The streets outside the alley were still busy, but the world around them felt eerily quiet. The shadows seemed to press in closer, as though they were waiting for something. "Okay," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But promise me you'll stay out of it after I tell you. Promise me that if you know the truth, you'll leave and never look back. This isn't a game. It's real, and it's dangerous." The millionaire's pulse quickened, his curiosity only growing stronger. What could be so dangerous? What kind of life had she been living that would make her plead for him to stay away from the truth? "I promise," he said, though he knew in his heart that he couldn't walk away now. He had to know. The woman took a deep breath, her hands shaking as she brushed a lock of hair out of her face. She looked down at her children, who were sitting quietly on the ground beside her, eyes wide with confusion and fear. "They don't know everything," she said softly, her gaze shifting back to the millionaire. "And I don't want them to. But you need to understand what I've been running from." The millionaire nodded, urging her to continue, though every fiber of his being wanted to reach out and shake the answers from her. "I used to have everything," she began, her voice distant, as though she were reliving a past life. "We were rich, well-known, powerful. My husband, he was a businessman. A big one. He had connections, power, everything anyone could ever want." The millionaire listened intently, his mind already beginning to piece together the fragments of her story. It was a familiar tale. Wealth. Power. Influence. He had seen it all before in his own world. But this woman, she had disappeared from that world without a trace. "But," he urged gently, "what happened?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with the kind of pain that spoke of years of buried secrets. "We were involved in something I didn't understand at first. My husband's business dealings weren't what they seemed. He had enemies, dangerous ones. People who would do anything to get what they wanted. And I was too naive to see it." Her voice cracked as she spoke, the weight of her confession sinking into the very fabric of the alley, turning it cold and lifeless. "I found out about it by accident," she continued, her eyes growing distant as she relived the memory. "I was going through some papers one day, documents, contracts, when I stumbled upon something I wasn't supposed to see. My husband, he was laundering money. For people, bad people. People who had connections to cartels, criminals, even politicians. I tried to confront him, but he denied it, told me I was imagining things. But I knew it was true." The millionaire's breath caught in his throat. This was bigger than he could have ever imagined. Money laundering, criminal connections, this woman's life had been entangled in a web of danger far beyond the simple riches he had assumed she was surrounded by. "And then it happened," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Someone came for me. They came for my children. They told me they would hurt them unless I did exactly what they said. My husband was gone by that time. I never saw him again. I think he left with them. He never came back, and I had to protect my kids. So I ran. I faked my death. I left everything behind. The house, the money, the life I knew. I had to disappear, or they would have killed me, too." The millionaire was stunned, his mind struggling to process everything she was telling him. This wasn't a story of a woman falling from grace, this was the story of a woman who had been forced to vanish, to give up everything, for the sake of her own survival. "Who came for you?" he asked, his voice low and urgent. "Who were they?" The woman's eyes flicked nervously around the alley, her gaze darting to the entrance and back. "I don't know who they were, but they were connected to something much bigger than I could understand. I was just a pawn in their game. A way to get to my husband. And when I disappeared, they didn't stop looking. They've been hunting me ever since. They found me once, but I was able to escape again. And now," she trailed off, her voice filled with terror. The millionaire felt a knot tighten in his stomach. This was far beyond anything he had imagined. This wasn't just a woman with a mysterious past. This was a woman who had been running for her life, caught in a tangled mess of crime and corruption. "They're still looking for me," she continued. "And now, they're after you, too. You shouldn't have gotten involved. I tried to protect my children, but I can't protect you now. It's too late. You've seen too much." The millionaire's mind was spinning. How could he just walk away now? He couldn't. The more he learned, the deeper the mystery became. And the more he realized how far he had already gone down this dangerous path. "I'm not leaving," he said firmly, though his voice trembled with the weight of everything he was learning. "I won't let them hurt you. I won't let them hurt anyone." The woman shook her head, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and something else, resignation. You don't understand. They're not just after me. They're after anyone who gets too close. You've already made yourself a target. Before the millionaire could respond, a distant noise echoed through the alley, footsteps, faint at first, but growing louder. He turned, his heart pounding in his chest. "They're here," the woman whispered, her voice shaking. "It's too late." The millionaire's mind raced. They were out of time. Whatever this was, it had escalated far beyond a simple encounter in an alley. They were being hunted, and the only thing left to do was fight. There were a few cars parked along the street, but they were too far away to be of any use. They couldn't afford to run in the open. It would be too risky. He glanced at the woman. "Where can we go? Do you know any safe houses? A place where we can hide?" The woman shook her head, her expression defeated. "There's no place left. They found every hiding spot I had. Every safe house. I don't even know if there's anywhere we can go now. They're everywhere." The millionaire's mind raced as he tried to think of a solution. He had never been in a situation like this, never had to face real danger like this. But he couldn't back down. He had to protect her, protect the children. He had to find a way to The distant footsteps grew louder, echoing through the alley like a warning, growing closer with every passing second. The woman's face drained of color, her eyes wide with fear as she stood up quickly, her children clutching her side. The millionaire could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating, as if the very walls of the alley were closing in on them. "They're here," the woman whispered, her voice barely audible over the sound of the approaching footsteps. Her eyes darted nervously around, searching for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. The alley was a dead end, and the only way out was the way they had come. The millionaire's heart was pounding in his chest, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he tried to make sense of the situation. He had no idea who they were, but he knew one thing for sure: if they were after the woman, they would stop at nothing to get what they wanted. And now, with him involved, he was in just as much danger. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice low but urgent. He could feel his pulse in his throat, his mind racing as he tried to think of a plan. But his options were limited. There was no time to think. The woman glanced toward the entrance of the alley, her eyes wide with panic. "We have to move. We can't stay here. They'll find us." She grabbed her children's hands and began to move quickly down the alley, her eyes scanning for any sign of escape. The millionaire hesitated for a moment, his instinct screaming at him to run, to get out of there before it was too late. But he couldn't leave them behind. He couldn't walk away now, not after everything he had learned. "Come on," he said, his voice urgent as he fell in step behind her. "We'll figure this out, but we need to move fast." The woman didn't reply, her focus entirely on the path ahead. She was in survival mode, and it was clear that every second counted. The millionaire followed her closely, the sound of their footsteps echoing off the narrow walls of the alley. They had to get out of there before the people chasing them arrived. But how? They reached the end of the alley, but the street was empty, too empty. The usual bustle of the city was missing, and the silence felt unnatural, like a trap had been set. "They've already cut us off," the woman said quietly, her voice trembling with fear. "They know we're here." The millionaire's eyes darted around, trying to fit them out of this alive. "We need to think," he muttered, his brain working overtime as he scanned the surroundings. Then, something caught his eye. A narrow side street led off from the main road, and it was shrouded in darkness. It wasn't much, but it might be enough to get them out of sight for a little while. "Over there," he said, pointing to the alleyway. "We can hide there for a moment. Just long enough to figure out our next move." The woman hesitated, her eyes flicking nervously to the street behind them. But she didn't argue. She turned toward the narrow side street, her children following her closely. The millionaire followed behind, his senses on high alert. Every footstep, every shadow seemed to hold a threat. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end as he realized just how deep he was now. He wasn't just an observer. He wasn't a bystander anymore. He was a part of this, whether he liked it or not. They reached the side street and ducked into the shadows, hiding behind a stack of old crates. The woman pressed her back against the wall, trying to control her breathing, her face pale with fear. The millionaire felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He couldn't imagine the constant fear she had lived with, the years of running, of never knowing who could. "We'll just stay here for a moment," the millionaire said, trying to sound reassuring even though he didn't feel reassured at all. "They won't be able to find us." The woman shook her head, her eyes wild with panic. "They will find us. They always find me. I can't keep running. I can't keep hiding. Be trusted." But he couldn't allow her to give up. He couldn't let her believe that there was no hope. "Not now. We're not done yet," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the tension. "We'll figure this out. I promise. Just stay with me." For a moment, they sat in silence, the sounds of the city just beyond the narrow street. The millionaire's thoughts were racing, but he couldn't focus on anything except the woman and her children. They were counting on him now. He glanced over at her, watching as she clutched her children to her side, her face a mixture of fear and exhaustion. She looked like a woman who had been running for far too long, a woman who had seen things no one should ever have to see. "I didn't want this for them," she said softly, her voice breaking. "They don't deserve this. They don't deserve any of it." The millionaire nodded, his eyes softening with understanding. "They don't deserve any of this. But we're going to get them out of here. I won't let anything happen to them." Just then, the sound of footsteps echoed in the distance, too close for comfort. The woman's eyes widened in fear, and she grabbed the millionaire's arm, her grip tight and desperate. "They're here," she whispered. "They found us." The millionaire's heart stopped for a moment. They were running out of time. The danger was closing in, and there was no way to avoid it now. "We need to move," he said urgently. "Now." The woman nodded, her face pale with terror, and they quickly moved further down the side street, trying to stay out of sight. But the footsteps were getting louder, and the millionaire knew they didn't have much time. The danger was right on their heels, and there was nowhere to hide. As they rounded a corner, the woman suddenly stopped. "There's a building," she said, her voice shaky. "A place I used to stay. It's not much, but it might buy us some time." Without waiting for a response, she led the way, the millionaire and the children following closely behind. Every step felt like a race against time, a race to escape the unseen danger that was closing in. The building was old, the windows boarded up, the door barely hanging on its hinges. It looked abandoned, perfect for hiding. They quickly slipped inside, the woman locking the door behind them. Inside, the building was dark, the air thick with dust and mildew. The millionaire could barely see, but he didn't care. They had made it inside. For now, they were safe. But he knew it wouldn't last. They couldn't stay hidden forever. The real question was, how much longer could they keep running? The air inside the abandoned building was thick and musty, the kind of stifling atmosphere that made every breath feel heavy, like the building itself was closing in on them. The millionaire's senses were on high alert as he stood in the dim light, his eyes scanning the room for any sign of movement, any indication that someone was lurking just outside. The woman was pacing back and forth, her face pale with fear, her eyes darting toward the boarded-up windows, checking for any sign of their pursuers. Her children sat huddled in the corner, eyes wide with terror, their small bodies shaking with every noise. "Are they gone?" the millionaire asked, his voice low, though he wasn't entirely sure he wanted the answer. He had to know, though. They needed to know if they were safe, even if just for a few minutes. The woman shook her head slowly. "No. They won't stop looking for me. They never do. They'll find us. It's only a matter of time. The weight of her words settled heavily in the room, a thick, oppressive fog that threatened to smother them all. The millionaire's stomach churned. He had been in dangerous situations before, but nothing like this. Nothing that involved innocent children, and certainly nothing that felt as personal as this. This was real. This was a nightmare unfolding in front of him. He glanced at the woman, watching as she tried to steady herself, her hands wringing in front of her, her eyes distant. She was losing hope, and he couldn't let that happen. Not when they were so close. "What happened to your husband?" he asked, his voice gentle. He knew she had already told him part of the story, but there were still so many unanswered questions, so many holes that needed to be filled. The woman's eyes flicked to him, but she didn't answer right away. It was as if the question had reopened a wound that was still fresh, still raw. "He disappeared," she said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "After I found out about the money laundering, after I confronted him, he vanished. I never saw him again. I think he left with them. The people he was working with." The millionaire frowned. There was so much about her story that didn't make sense, but there was one thing he was certain of: she wasn't lying. Every word she spoke, every action she took, told him she was telling the truth. But why? Why would she be targeted like this? And why was her husband so involved? "The people he was working with, who are they?" he asked. "What do they want from you?" The woman's face twisted in pain as she sat down heavily on the floor, her back against the cold, damp wall. She let out a long, shaky breath, as though she had been holding her secrets for far too long. "They're not just anyone," she whispered. "They're connected to people at the top. People in the government, in high positions. Powerful people. People who don't take kindly to anyone crossing them. And my husband, he got too deep. I was just an innocent bystander, but once I knew the truth, there was no turning back." The millionaire's heart skipped a beat. Powerful people. Government connections. It was the stuff of conspiracies and high-stakes power plays, the kind of thing that didn't belong in the everyday world. It didn't belong in a life like hers. "Did you ever meet them?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "These people. Did you ever get a glimpse of who they are?" The woman's eyes darkened, and she looked away. "No. Not in person. But I know they're dangerous. I know they have eyes everywhere, ears everywhere. They could be anyone. Your neighbor, your friend, your boss. They're everywhere." The millionaire absorbed her words, the reality of the situation settling like a stone in his stomach. This was no ordinary criminal syndicate. This was something much deeper, much more insidious. And if they were truly as powerful as she said, they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to make sense of it all. He had been a part of a world that had its own dangers, its own dark secrets. But this? This was a level he hadn't imagined, a level he wasn't sure he could navigate. "Do you think your husband is still alive?" he asked quietly, looking at her with a mixture of sympathy and concern. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes flicked toward the children, and her gaze softened for a moment. Then, she looked back at him, her expression tight with something he couldn't quite read: regret, maybe. Or fear. "I don't know," she said quietly, her voice breaking. "I don't know if he's alive or dead. But I don't think it matters anymore. He made his choices. And now, I'm the one left to pick up the pieces. I'm the one left to protect them." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. The millionaire watched her closely, sensing the depth of her pain, the unbearable weight of her fear. There was a long silence before the woman spoke again, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "I think they've been tracking us, watching us. They've been waiting for me to make a mistake, to slip up. And I did." The millionaire's stomach turned. What was she talking about? What mistake had she made? Tell me, he said softly. What mistake? She looked at him, her face pale with the weight of her words. I've been in touch with someone. Someone who knows more about them than I do. Someone who's been helping me. The millionaire felt a cold chill run down his spine. Who? He asked, though he had a sinking feeling he already knew the answer. She shook her head, her hands trembling as she covered her face. I shouldn't have contacted them. I shouldn't have trusted them. But they said they could help us. They said they could keep us safe. The millionaire's heart skipped a beat. The mystery deepened, and his suspicions grew. Who was it? He pressed again. Who did you contact? But the woman didn't answer. Instead, she closed her eyes, as though the weight of everything was too much to bear. Her face twisted in anguish. It was someone close to us, she said, her voice barely audible. Someone who worked for my husband. Someone who I thought I could trust. The millionaire felt his blood run cold. Someone who worked for her husband. A person inside their circle. Could this be the person who had been feeding information to the people chasing them? Before he could ask another question, the sound of footsteps again echoed from outside the building, much louder this time. The unmistakable sound of heavy boots on concrete. Someone was coming. They're here, the woman whispered, her face pale with fear. It's too late. We have to go now. The millionaire grabbed her by the arm, his mind racing. There was no time to waste. He had to make a decision. Stay and fight, or run and risk it all. We can't outrun them, he said, his voice steady despite the fear surging through him. But we can't stay here either. We need a plan. But the woman's eyes were already filled with resignation. There's no time. They'll find us. They always do. With a last, lingering look at her children, she turned and moved quickly toward the back of the building. The millionaire followed her, his heart pounding in his chest. This was no longer about surviving. It was about escaping the darkness that was closing in on them all. The sound of the footsteps grew louder, the rhythmic pounding of boots against concrete growing closer with each passing second. The air inside the abandoned building was suffocating, thick with tension and the heavy weight of fear that seemed to cling to every corner. The millionaire could feel the woman's trembling hand in his, her fingers cold and tight, as they moved quickly through the dark, crumbling hallway at the back of the building. There's a way out, she whispered urgently, her voice shaking with the force of her own panic. We can get out of here, but we need to be quick. The millionaire nodded, but his mind was racing. They couldn't outrun the people after them. They had known that from the beginning. But they had to try. They had to do something. Where are we going? He asked, his voice low, his heart pounding in his chest. The woman didn't answer at first, her eyes darting around as she led them deeper into the building, navigating through the maze of corridors with an almost desperate sense of urgency. It was clear that she knew this place better than she was letting on. She had been here before. Many times, perhaps. There's an exit through the basement, she said finally, her voice strained. It's a long shot, but it's the only way out that hasn't been compromised. They reached the basement door, an old wooden door that creaked loudly as the woman pushed it open. The air inside was damp and musty, the faint smell of mildew and decay filling the air. The basement was even darker than the rest of the building, the only light coming from a single, flickering bulb that hung from the ceiling like a ghostly sentinel. The woman stepped inside, pulling the children with her, and the millionaire followed, his senses on high alert. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that someone was out there, waiting for them to make a mistake. This way, the woman said, her voice a little more confident now as she moved quickly across the floor. We'll be safe here for a while. They won't expect us to take the basement exit. The millionaire glanced around the basement, his mind racing. He couldn't help but wonder how much longer they could keep running. Every moment they spent hiding felt like an eternity, the walls of the world closing in on them tighter with each passing second. What if they've already figured this out? He asked, his voice edged with doubt. What if they're waiting for us at the exit? The woman's eyes narrowed, her face a mask of grim determination. If they've figured it out, we're already dead. But I don't think they have. They wouldn't expect us to take this route. They think we're still upstairs. The sound of distant voices echoed from above, followed by the sound of footsteps as they moved through the building. The millionaire's heart sank as he realized just how close they were. The people hunting them were getting closer, and there was nowhere left to hide. We don't have much time, the woman said, urgency creeping into her voice. We have to move now. She led the way through the basement, past old crates and broken furniture that littered the floor. The faint sound of creaking wood overhead made the millionaire's skin crawl, but he pushed the fear aside, focusing on the task at hand. They had to get out of there, and fast. At the far end of the basement, the woman stopped in front of a large metal door that was barely visible in the darkness. It was old and rusted, the hinges creaking in protest as she pushed it open. Beyond the door was a narrow alley, the outside world just beyond it. The street was eerily quiet, the only sound the soft rustling of wind against the trash that lined the gutters. The millionaire stepped through the door, his heart pounding in his chest as he glanced around. They were out, but they weren't safe, not yet. Where do we go from here? He asked, his voice tense. The woman looked around quickly, her eyes scanning the dark alley. She seemed to be weighing her options, considering the risks before making a decision. There's an old garage a few blocks away, she said finally, her voice steady but tense. We can lay low there for a while. It's not much, but it'll buy us some time. The millionaire nodded, and the two of them set off, moving quickly down the alley. The children were close behind them, clinging to their mother's side as they walked, their small feet stumbling along the uneven pavement. The streets were quiet, too quiet. The city that was usually alive with the hum of traffic and the chatter of people seemed almost abandoned, like the calm before a storm. But the millionaire knew better. It was the calm that came when danger was close, when the air was thick with the promise of something terrible on the horizon. He kept glancing over his shoulder, his instincts screaming that something was wrong. They weren't being followed, at least, not yet, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. There was something in the air, something he couldn't put his finger on, but it made every nerve in his body fire with an unsettling sense of urgency. Suddenly, a figure appeared in the distance, a shadow moving quickly down the street. The millionaire's heart skipped a beat, and he reached out instinctively, grabbing the woman's arm and pulling her and the children into the shadows of a nearby building. The figure drew closer, and the millionaire's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't one of the men chasing them. It wasn't even a familiar face. It was a man, tall, with a military bearing and a cold, calculating look in his eyes. He moved with purpose, as though he knew exactly where he was going. What the hell? The millionaire muttered under his breath. Who is that? The woman's face paled as she peered around the corner, her eyes wide with fear. I don't know. But he's not one of them. He's not one of the people after us. Then who is he? The millionaire pressed, his voice low. The woman didn't answer. She was too busy watching the man as he passed them by, unaware of their presence. The tension in the air seemed to thicken as the man disappeared around the corner, leaving them in an eerie silence. Who the hell was that? The millionaire asked again, his voice sharp with urgency. I don't know, the woman said quietly, her voice trembling. But I think we've been wrong about who's after us. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their meaning. The millionaire felt his blood run cold as he realized the truth. They weren't just being hunted by the criminals her husband had betrayed. They were being hunted by something much bigger, much more dangerous. And now, they were trapped in the middle of a war they didn't understand, a war they had no hope of winning. I've never seen him before, she said, her voice steady despite the fear that still lingered in the air. But I think I can. The night had fallen over the city like a suffocating blanket, a heavy silence that seemed to settle on everything. The streets were empty now, the usual hum of urban life replaced by a stillness that felt unnatural, like the calm before a storm. But it wasn't the city that the millionaire was worried about anymore. It was the storm that had been brewing around him, pulling him deeper into a web of lies, deceit, and danger. A storm he hadn't seen coming. The woman's words echoed in his mind, "We've been wrong about who's after us." The man they had seen earlier, the mysterious figure, the one who had passed them by so silently, hadn't been a part of the syndicate. He wasn't one of the people chasing them for information. No, he was someone else entirely. Someone who had been hiding in the shadows, watching from the sidelines, waiting for the right moment to make his move. The millionaire had been so focused on the immediate danger, on keeping them all safe from the men after them, that he hadn't stopped to think about the bigger picture. He hadn't stopped to think about who might have been pulling the strings all along. And now, it was too late to turn back. They had reached the garage the woman had spoken of, a run-down, nondescript building at the edge of the city. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep them hidden for a while. The doors creaked open slowly, the rusted metal groaning in protest as they stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of oil and old machinery, but at least it was quiet. At least they were safe, for the moment. The woman motioned for them to sit against the far wall, her eyes scanning the street outside through the cracked window. The children huddled close to her, their small hands clutching at her clothing as though they could somehow find safety in her presence alone. The millionaire stood near the door, his mind racing. The man they had seen earlier, the one who had walked past them with military precision, who was he? What did he want? And why had he been watching them? He turned to the woman, his voice low. "You've seen him before, haven't you? The man from the street. Who is he?" The woman looked at him, her eyes tired but sharp. "Ow, who he works for." The millionaire frowned. "Who?" She hesitated, her gaze flicking to the children before she looked back at him. "The government. Or at least, people connected to it. The same people who have been after me. But not in the way you think." He stared at her, his mind spinning. The government? She couldn't be serious. They had been running from criminals, from a syndicate her husband had crossed. How could the government be involved in all of this? "Explain," he demanded, his voice firm. "What do you mean?" The woman's face tightened, her eyes full of pain. "You don't understand. It's not just about money laundering or some criminal operation. It's about power. Control. There are people in high places who don't want the truth getting out. And my husband, he knew too much." The millionaire's blood ran cold as her words sank in. He had suspected something bigger was at play, but this? This was beyond anything he could have imagined. "Your husband was working with them?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. She nodded slowly, her expression grim. "He wasn't just a pawn. He was a part of it. He helped them cover their tracks, hid their dirty dealings. But then he found out too much. He started questioning things, asking the wrong questions. And that's when they decided he was expendable." The millionaire felt a knot form in his stomach. This was worse than he thought. If her husband had been a part of something that deep, that powerful, if he had crossed the wrong people, then there was no telling how far they would go to silence him. And by extension, her. And now, her children. He took a deep breath, his mind racing. There had to be a way out of this. There had to be a way to stop it all. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice strained with the weight of the question. The woman looked at him, her eyes full of resolve. "We fight back." His heart skipped a beat. "Fight back," he repeated incredulously. "Against who?" "You said they're everywhere, inside the government, in the shadows." How can we fight against that? She stood up, her face hardening. We may not have the resources, but we have something they don't, the truth. And the truth is more dangerous to them than any weapon. The millionaire's mind clicked into gear. Truth. That was it. If her husband had discovered something they didn't want getting out, if he had learned something that threatened the very foundations of the system they had built their empire on, then they would stop at nothing to bury it. But what if he could expose that truth? What if they could bring everything to light, put the very people who had been hunting them in the spotlight? He took a step toward her, his voice low but urgent. You're right. The truth can destroy them. But where do we start? How do we even begin to fight something like this? The woman paused, her expression thoughtful. We go to the press. To the media. They'll help us. They'll listen. The millionaire shook his head. You don't understand. If we go public, they'll kill us before we even get a chance to speak. They've already shown they'll stop at nothing. We need to be smarter than that. The woman's face hardened, her eyes narrowing with determination. Then we go underground. We find a way to get the evidence into the right hands, someone who can expose them without putting us at risk. The millionaire nodded slowly, his mind racing with the possibilities. And we have to do it fast. Before they come for us again. The sound of a car engine broke their conversation, the sound of tires skidding on gravel coming from outside. The woman's face went pale. They're here. The millionaire turned to the door, his heart pounding in his chest. They didn't have much time. But there was one thing he knew for certain, they couldn't run anymore. This was it. This was the moment that would decide everything. He turned to the woman, meeting her gaze. There was no going back now. No more hiding. They were going to fight back. Let's do this, he said, his voice steady. The woman nodded, her face set with determination. For the truth. They moved quickly, heading toward the back exit of the garage, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The children stayed close to their mother, their small faces a mixture of fear and hope. The millionaire felt his pulse quicken as they approached the door. This was their chance. The truth was within their reach, and with it, a way to bring the people who had been hunting them to justice. But as they reached for the door, the world seemed to shift. A shadow moved across the threshold, blocking their way. The man from earlier, the one with the military bearing, stood there, his eyes cold and calculating. It's too late, he said, his voice low. You should have stayed out of this. Now, you've crossed a line you can't uncross. The millionaire's heart dropped into his stomach. It was over. But he wouldn't go down without a fight. You're wrong, the woman said, her voice shaking but fierce. We're going to find us. This. We're going to expose the truth. The man didn't move, his expression unreadable. Then you'll die trying. And in that moment, the final battle began. A battle for truth. A battle for survival. A battle that would change everything.